Hello, welcome everyone to our November one-day summit, Somatic Attachment Healing. My name is Allison and I am your host for this workshop entitled The Choice to Repair, Embodied Conflict Resolution with Kai Cheng Thom. Kai Cheng Thom is a writer, performer, somatic healer, and body worker based in Toronto, colonially known as Toronto, Canada. She has published and spoken widely on trauma and transformative justice. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Kai Cheng, and we will let you take it away.
Thank you so much, Allison. What a delight to be here with all of you from so many different places in the world. I was like, oh, how lucky. I'm the early session, so there won't be that many people. And maybe that's true, but if not that many people is 730 of you, it's not necessarily that much of a break from a giant and anxiety-inducing audience. Still, looking at all your faces, you look pretty nice to me, so that's helping soothe some of my attachment anxieties. I just want to tell you before I launch into content and give you, the value that you're here for, hopefully. I flew out from Toronto to the west coast of Turtle Island, also known as North America, last night. And I'm now speaking to you from this time zone, meaning that we are at 6 a.m. and I got off a plane 3 hours ago. So if I seem a little discombobulated, that's why. It's not you. So that hopefully will soothe any attachment anxieties on your end as well as mine. And we can proceed in the spirit of knowing that I'm just a little bit wired. So I also want to say thank you so much, Allison, for acknowledging the territory that I am based in, which is Toronto, Canada, Treaty 13 territory with the Mississaugas of the Credit, also traditionally stewarded by the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and the Anishinaabe. Since I am in colonially known Vancouver now, I would also like to acknowledge the Indigenous territories of the Salish, the Musqueam, and the Tsleil-Waututh, who stewarded these lands long before settlers came to them. And this land is unceded Indigenous territory, which is important, actually, for a conversation about conflict resolution and attachment repair and embodiment, because I don't know about you, but I think it would be pretty silly to be like, yes, I know stuff about conflict, which maybe I do and maybe I don't, without acknowledging that the dominant culture and the society that I live in was in many ways born out of a violent conflict, not a conflict chosen by the Indigenous peoples who lived and continue to live here, but one chosen and enacted by settler colonial peoples. And we're not going to have the opportunity to get too deep into that today, but I will try and weave it into the material we are talking about, because I'm pretty sure most of you are hailing from territories that have known the impact or impacts of colonization in various ways. And when we weave that into our practice around embodiment and conflict healing, I think that really changes how we understand it and what we do. And it also shifts our conversation away from, the ostensibly neutral, oh, I'd like to repair some conflict with people, to the work of justice. Like, how do we look at power dynamics and the broader picture, the social scope of conflict resolution. So that may be a newer concept for some of you, and that may be very familiar to others, and that's all okay. We are here to learn. All right, so inviting you to take a long breath in and a long breath out. Maybe try another one of those. We know that when we extend our exhale and breathe slowly and deeply, the parasympathetic nervous system is stimulated, which generally slows down the heart, among other things. And so I invite you to notice what that might be like, to take some time here at the top of our presentation, whatever time it is for you, to intentionally slow down your heart. And maybe that's really soothing for you. Or maybe you kind of don't like it, in which case you could stop. Choice is key. And maybe it's kind of neutral and you're not sure yet, in which case you could just continue. Or try any other somatic resourcing or grounding technique that you already know, like pushing your feet gently into the ground, maybe looking around the space that you are in and noticing anything that you like or at least find neutral about it. I am in a nondescript hotel room, so I'm mostly finding it neutral and not super pleasant. And noticing what happens in your body. First, as you resource yourself, and then second, as you bring your awareness to this great big group of people we're here with today. So in a moment, I'm going to invite you to think about a conflict you've had. But before I do that, I really want to say this should be like a level 6 or lower out of 10 on the intensity scale, if 0 is no conflict and 10 is life-threatening, traumatic, overwhelming conflict. We only have about less than an hour now together today. And I would really prefer if we didn't overwhelm anybody or kind of go into material that can't be closed. I don't want to ruin anyone's day, basically, is what I'm saying. This is my attachment anxiety show. I don't want to hurt anybody. And so I'm inviting you to choose a conflict that's a 6 out of 10 or lower. And sometimes we don't know how intense the conflict that we're going to choose to think about is actually. So you could just try it out and see what's coming up in your body and maybe then choose a different one if this isn't going to work for you. And a gentle reminder as well that you don't gotta, as one of my favorite colleagues, Captain Liam Snowden would say, you don't gotta do any of this stuff. Choosing is more important than doing. That's something important to remember for trauma healing work and somatic work in general. Choosing more important than doing, and particularly for conflict resolution. Surprise conflict resolution and forced conflict resolution are usually everybody's least favorite forms of conflict resolution. For attachment healing and like the kind of interpersonal conflict repair that we're going to be talking about today, choice is key. A lot of people out there, when I go and do conflict resolution work, I should have said, it wasn't in my bio, but I'm a professional mediator, and so I do conflict resolution as a job every day. When I go to do conflict resolution, usually between people, as opposed to, say, between companies or corporations, a lot of folks will say, well, I don't believe that I should have to resolve this conflict. It should be the other person who's going to resolve it. Or this has been a really horrible situation for me and my boss is making me do this. I don't really want to. And there are some things we can do when people don't really want to do conflict resolution, but there is so much more that is possible when folks are choosing it. And I think people respond negatively to the idea of forced or surprise conflict resolution because it's sort of embedded in a lot of the dominant cultural norms that many of us have growing up or going to school. Was anyone here, ever made to like shake hands or hug somebody that they were, in a conflict with before they were ready to shake hands or hug? And maybe that shaking hands was really horrible. Yeah. So what we really don't want to do is replicate that. So many people will say to me with suspicion, oh, you're the mediator. You're the one who does transformative justice. You're going to make me sit down and talk it out or touch somebody that I don't want to touch or forgive somebody I don't want to forgive. And so we come to the first really important thing I think I'm going to say about conflict resolution, embodiment, and attachment work, which is that, again, it must be chosen. It cannot be forced. We cannot force ourselves or others to forgive other people, and we cannot force ourselves or others to repair a relationship, smile and fix it for the sake of fixing, and really expect to have a repaired relationship. And yet, I think so many of us have been expected to do that. And we might pretend, right? We might fake it or force it, but that's not really, to me, an embodied experience of conflict repair. And in some cases, it might actually be much more healing and much more resolutionary. I'm going to make up this word. It might feel a lot more like resolution to part ways and never touch or speak to one another again, at least in the immediate future, to say we're going to let this go, and part ways and diverge, acknowledging that we can't be around each other right now. That might actually be a lot more of a healing experience than forcing like some folks to come back together. Okay, so are you ready? Maybe you are, maybe you aren't, but that's okay. You don't have to do this if you're not ready. I'm going to invite you to think about a conflict that you've had with a friend, a family member, or another loved one. A 6 out of 10, remember? And if you want to, you could close your eyes and just for a few seconds, bring yourself back there, but you don't have to. You could also jot down some notes or just watch the screen, do whatever you need to recall this, but not go too deep into it. Just remember, oh, what was happening? What was it like? What was said or not said? And then take a few moments to write down or type, just for yourself, what you're noticing in your body as you consider this conflict, this 6 out of 10 or less intensity conflict with someone whom you care or cared about. I will tell you quickly my own story while you're thinking about this, which is, it's quite funny. I was with my fiance for our first visit to their family, and they have a giant family. They're mostly like a white family, and I'm an Asian person, and that alone was going to be a little bit anxiety provoking for me. But also, they're like a they all gather at this big home, and there's too many people for beds or bedrooms in the home, and so a lot of people sleep outside on the lawn. And I said to my fiance, I cannot sleep outside in the midsummer of Ontario because I'm allergic to mosquitoes. And my fiance said, sure, of course. But of course we get there and what should happen. But, my fiance says, well, actually all the older people have taken the beds and the bedrooms and we're going to sleep in this beautiful tent outside. Isn't it wonderful? I said, what the heck? And, was outraged and, flew into a rage actually, because the night had fallen and I was getting, a swelling up like Lumpy Space Princess. I don't know if anybody here knows Lumpy Space Princess. It's a reference to Adventure Time cartoon. She's a princess made out of lumps, and that's what I was on that night, a princess made out of lumps. She's also very angry, and that's what I was that night. I was very angry. And suddenly we were no longer arguing about mosquitoes, we were arguing about racism and interracial relationships. And I was trans and this family was transphobic. I was saying, I don't think they really were, but I was really feeling that. And then I was saying, well, you don't really love me and stuff. And suddenly it seemed like maybe we were gonna break up. And I keep on calling them my fiance, so you know that the story ends happily. And I'm wondering if anyone here, as you're thinking about your conflicts, noticed that maybe those two suddenly escalated really quickly from something surface to something much deeper. And I'm seeing some of you on the screen nod, and maybe that's not the experience of others of you, but just to say, I too have had my experience of a level 6 attachment rupture. So now if you're ready, I'd like to invite you to type into the chat and share with everyone, but again, choosing more important than doing. What were you noticing in your body as you thought about this conflict that you've had in the past with someone you care about? Lots of stuff in the body, yeah, and for the public, I see resistance, anxiety, I felt my heart tug, jaw tightening, unpleasant feeling in my stomach, sadness, exhale, anger, sadness, heaviness in the chest, face crinkled, fear, sensation in the solar plexus and heart, raised shoulders, jaw tension. It feels like a broken heart, rapid breathing, butterflies. Yeah, and there are so many more pouring in. Thank you so much for sharing. And something I'm going to draw your attention to is so each of you individually, is not alone in having an embodied response to this 6 out of 10 or lower even intensity conflict. That the body responds to conflict. And even if it is a 6 out of 10, or maybe a 3 out of 10, or a 2 out of 10, when we have conflict with people we care about, it brings up something intense and something maybe even related to a survival instinct. So I guess the second thing that I will say that might feel important, after the choosing is more important than doing part, is conflict with people we care about, and also just conflict in general, usually activates our attachment systems and makes us fear that we are no longer worthy of belonging, or we're not going to belong. Oh, I see some friends in the chat. Hello, friends. This is something that we often miss in like the swirl or the rush of conflict. I missed it for sure when I was having a conflict with my fiance about the mosquitoes. In my surge of like, well, you're wrong, actually, and I am going to die here, surrounded by these Ontario mosquitoes in this tent. What was also happening for me was, oh, you don't care about me. You're not hearing me. I don't belong here. I'm going to lose this relationship, or this relationship has already been lost because you don't care about me. And I'm pretty sure that's what my fiance was thinking as well. And so what I'd like to talk to you about with you today is that thing that happens inside our individual and collective bodies when we have conflict, that burst of pain that for some of us feels like a broken heart, or tightness in the stomach, or pain, or for others of us might feel like a numbness or a shutdown, or like a sudden losing of the ability to care. Which, and this is not my language, by the way, language I'm taking from lots of other people. Among them, Sue Johnson is a developer of emotionally focused couples therapy, relationship rupture or attachment rupture. This break in the tissue of a relationship that we can feel inside of our bodies and causes pain. And then in that experience of embodied somatic pain, we might do any number of things to try and relieve ourselves of it, whether that's fawning over the person that we're in conflict with, or lashing out at the person we're in conflict with, or fleeing from the relationship, or shutting down. It's that experience of pain that we are often trying to get away from in our bodies when we are having conflict. I don't know about you, but when I am in conflict, I feel like I am dying. Anyone else? Some of you are like, no, I'm very good at conflict, actually. Great, that's good. You should become mediators. Oh, all the hands are going up, though, about this dying thing. Okay, so a lot of us now feel like we are dying when we're in conflict. Yeah, physically, I feel like I'm dying. And I would do a lot of things to get rid of that feeling inside of my body. And if you like, you could share some things that you do to try and get rid of that feeling in your body in the chat, just so that we know, so that we're not alone. But it's, again, not a requirement. And some of you might share that you are really good and like very embodied in your conflicts, and that's great. So some of you might be familiar, or probably, I'm going to guess a lot of you, if you're interested in embodiment and somatic healing, I'm going to guess that a lot of you are familiar with this window of tolerance model that I'm showing you here. So this is not my model. I've just crudely drawn it on PowerPoint from Pat Ogden, who is a psychologist, and Dan Siegel, who is a medical doctor's work. around nervous system arousal and what happens in the body when the nervous system experiences stress. And so for those of you who are not as familiar with the window of tolerance model, I will quickly describe it now. But there's, a deep, deep well of information that you could look into around this that I'm not going to get into today. So just to say, there's much more here than we will have time to talk about. So the window of tolerance, as it is often called, is understood by somatic practitioners and a lot of trauma healers as a threshold of stress in the nervous system, or that the nervous system can respond to, that is relatively optimal. And this is all contestable language, but we'll just go with this for now. That in each person, there is a certain amount of stress that the nervous system can respond to, while remaining socially engaged. What do we mean by social engagement? Well, I think probably there are practitioners out there who could explain this a lot better than I could, but for my purposes, I'd like to describe social engagement as the ability to be curious about other people without feeling an overwhelming amount of anxiety. And compassion as well comes into that we can be curious and compassionate about other people while still experiencing whatever emotions we're experiencing and not feeling an overwhelming amount of anxiety in that curiosity or compassion. So if you think about conflicts that you've been in the past, it could be that you, or maybe the other person that you were in conflict in, just stopped being curious about each other's experience, that it was about, well, you were wrong, or you were wrong and I'm right, and let me convince you. That's one thing that sometimes happens in conflict. Or maybe you or the other person got really intense about, like, I need to know what you think, I need a resolution, I need to just get inside your head, help me understand. But it was kind of coming from an anxious place, and because it was coming from that anxious place, not actually feeling very safe to unravel and share with. So this is what I mean when I say social engagement, is when we're able to feel nervous system stress but remain curious and compassionate in a relatively non-anxious way about other people. Now, I know I'm never not going to be anxious about other people's thoughts and feelings when I'm experiencing conflict or other forms of relational stress. So that's why I say relatively. It's all relative. So when the social engagement system is on, and our emotional engagement system's also on when we are in our window of tolerance. When we are outside of our window, when the level of stress in our individual bodies surpasses the threshold that the nervous system is able to tolerate while remaining socially engaged, so the theory goes, polyvagal theory, that is from Stephen Porges, then the social engagement system turns off. And we have one of two, or maybe some combination in rapid succession of nervous system survival responses. And the one at the top, which I will draw your attention to in the red text, is hyperarousal. When the sympathetic nervous system is dominant, we often experience elevated heart rate, rapid breathing, and an emotional tone of panic or rage in this survival state. We often call the individual strategies in this survival state fight or flight, or sometimes a high intensity freeze, like that feeling of the muscles being locked, the way that a deer in headlights might freeze. And the other branch, or the other form of nervous system survival state, is hypoarousal, which is when the parasympathetic nervous system is dominant, which lowers our heart rate, results in perhaps a shallower breath, and an emotional tone of numbness, depression, or boredom. So it depends on our own individual histories and the specific context that we're in, which of these states we might go into when pushed beyond our window of tolerance threshold of nervous system stress. And conflicts are some of the one of the easiest ways to throw people out of their windows of tolerance. Why? Because again, conflict activates our sense of not belonging and unsafety. Of I'm going to be harmed, or I'm going to lose my social group. And so it's very easy for folks to fly out of the window of tolerance into one of these survival states when in conflict. Conflict is very stressful. And a lot of you mentioned you felt like you were dying when in conflict. That's a good sign that we might be getting out of our windows of tolerance, because our survival states activate when we fear death, or when the body neurocepts, when the body senses that there might be life-threatening danger, whether or not that is really the case out in the real world. And we're all living in different social contexts, so it's up to you to decide, when what is an externally dangerous situation and what is not. So, let me take us into a moment to take a long breath in and a longer breath out. And once again, maybe glance around the room or the environment that you're in, and notice any objects or aspects of your environment that you like or find soothing. Yeah. Maybe taking a moment to go inward and notice what's coming up in your body. As we talk about conflict and these nervous system survival states, maybe you are noticing that you tend to go more quickly toward hyperarousal, the fight or flight or high freeze in conflict. Maybe you're noticing that you tend to go more quickly toward hypoarousal, this dropping out or shutting down. Sometimes a submission, like, oh, you're right, whatever you say, anything to get out of this conflict, you're right. Maybe it depends on who you're talking to. Like, maybe you are more likely to go toward fight or flight, a high intensity response when you are having a conflict with a family member or partner, and more likely to go toward hypoarousal, a low tone response when you are in a conflict with your boss at work. Maybe some of us are racialized or otherwise marginalized folks living in settler colonial societies, and it has become like a cultural norm to go into hypoarousal when near police or other authority figures who are agents of the government. These are things that can happen, and all valid, actually. I am not trying to tell you that hyperarousal or hypoarousal in response to conflict are bad or not desirable. Often, they're extremely desirable. When we want to get out of a dangerous situation that is life-threatening, then we quite naturally might go into a survival response, do fight or flight or freeze or collapse or submit, and then get the heck out of there. And that is good. I want people to survive. Where the survival responses are not so helpful, usually, is where we want to come back into a repaired relationship with the people or groups that we are in conflict with. When we want to have that experience of conflict resolution that is warm or fuzzy, or at least relieving, because we know that the other person is holding on to the relationship and we're holding on to it as well. And when we are in hyperarousal, fight or flight, it's very easy for us to cause or experience relational wounding. That thing that happens when we hear something that is hurtful, when we say something that is hurtful, when we do something that is hurtful, like there might be actually physical actions that are hurtful, or when we experience sudden abandonment, that flying away from conflict or being flown away from. And when we are in hypoarousal, it is very easy to experience relational detachment. Like, oh, I'm losing my ability to stay close to someone in this relationship. I'm losing my ability to feel the embodied sense of caring, even though in my mind, I know I really do care about this other person on the other end. So if I'm mad at my fiance about not getting me an indoor bedroom and I'm allergic to mosquitoes and I suddenly shut down, which is something that I often do, by the way, in conflicts, I know that I still love my fiance, but it's hard for me to feel that in my body. And then what's happening on the other end is that my fiance experiences me as shutting down and withdrawing, and maybe they have an experience of abandonment on their end. And so the attachment between us, our ability to sense each other's connection, to feel from one another the sense of being worthy, being good, being competent, being lovable, is suddenly troubled and called into question, which is really terrifying for a lot of people. So we're aiming to find a way into this window of tolerance, as Dan Siegel or Pat Ogden call it, when we're in conflict, when we want to repair the relationship, when we want to stay in long-term, sustainable, authentic relationship with another. And I'm going to invite you to type into the chat, what are you noticing happen in your body as we talk about these things? What sensations or emotions are coming through? I see relief. I see hopeful, inspired, an aha moment. I feel unified. I feel seen and validated. Curiosity, validated. Fear, restless, integration. Heart rate rising, feeling anxiety. It's like realizing something. Relief, affection, not enoughness, understanding, awareness, and curiosity. Aha moments, feeling safe. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So a variety of embodied experiences, and this is all welcome. It makes sense that we would have different responses, but we are having a response, many of us, I see, to the content that is being shared. And some of you will feel probably like that sense of relief when something is described. When we put things into language, there's often a sense of relief when we can describe or have described our emotions and sensations, and others might feel a little bit of like, whoa, that's a lot. A little bit of overwhelm or a little bit of triggering, things like this, and that's okay. So I'm going to invite us to do a somatic exercise that I learned from trauma educator and Jungian analyst in training, Jane Clapp, who is a friend and amazing teacher of mine. And the exercise is simple. And again, don't gotta do it if you don't want to, but just sway from side to side. And just notice, what's this swaying like? Maybe finding a rhythm, a pace that is best for you. Maybe it's best for you not to sway. It's the choosing, not the doing, that counts. And then you might turn your attention to the screen and find someone on it, don't tell them, and sync your rocking to theirs so that you are rocking at the same speed. And just notice what it's like. So we all sort of start to come into a similar tempo. I notice we're slowing down. Then we might gently, slowly bring ourselves to a stop. You might bring one hand up and over the heart space, another hand on top of that hand. Breathe into your heart, breathe into your hands. And if you like, you might imagine that your hands are cradling your heart, supporting your heart. Many of you may know that there is a nerve that runs from the face to the heart to the stomach. And when we are activated, the heart speeds up in response to stimulation through that nerve, or slows down. So the heart is very changeable. It's meant to shift its speed, which is good. But sometimes our heart might need a little support because there's a lot going on in that heart. And so you might take a moment to notice what happens with your hands on your heart. You might give yourself an extra pulse of pressure from hands to heart as you breathe in long. As you breathe out, slow release. And gently transitioning back to the screen. And if you like, sharing in the chat, how was that little somatic exercise for you? I see calming, comforting, connecting, calming, magical, grounding, soothing, calm, comforting. Nice. Carrying my heart, powerful. Not every somatic grounding activity is going to work the same way for everyone. Some of you may not have liked that or felt nothing, and that's okay. Yeah, we're experimenting to find out what works for us, and that's okay. Know that you are not alone if you didn't like it. And it seems like if you did like it, you're definitely not alone. It's there in the chat. So what did we do? Well, we did a grounding that was individual, like hands on the heart, breathing. Lots of you may know these techniques. Some of you may know the butterfly hug or grounding breath or other forms of individual grounding. What I love about the rocking is it is a collective grounding. And as we've spoken about, conflict activates the sense of disbelonging, unbelonging. I'm going to lose the relationship. And so when we can do something in our bodies that connects us to other people and reminds us that we are not alone, even in conflict or high distress, sometimes that's very soothing, particularly for conflict. And this is why, actually, in conflict, many of us, not everyone, but many of us will immediately look for someone to tell about the conflict. Does anyone here do that? That's me. I'm telling people about conflict all the time. And sometimes that gets us into trouble because we're like, it's like, oh, you spilled the conflict to someone else, and now it's a bigger conflict because more people are involved. Anyone ever get any feedback like that? You shouldn't have told these people? And sometimes it's the way we share that is, not the most skillful or whatever, but I just want to validate that is a very normal and common response to bring other people into conflict because we want to feel not alone in it. We want to feel that if we're going to maybe lose relationship with the people we're in conflict with, at least there are some other people that we're going to stay in relationship with. And where that gets tricky is where maybe we start to fight with, to hold on to relationships like, oh, I'm going to keep all these friends and you're going to lose all the other friends. Then it starts to get escalatory and strange. But the base instinct to gather one's connections and stay close is generally pretty good. And for those of us who are being called as a third party in a conflict, it might be really important to decide, oh, I'm going to try not to take a side. I'm going to try and show all the parties in this conflict that I'm going to stay in connection with them, because that is probably what's going to de-escalate the conflict. Now, that's not going to be possible in every conflict. So again, we're going to choose with discernment, right? But I'm wondering if there's anybody here who maybe picked a side in a conflict and then maybe thought back on it and was like, maybe I should have stayed more impartial or neutral. Anyone here have that thought? Yeah, and there are many reasons for that possibly. But one is conflict is especially interpersonal conflict where relationships are at stake, is about belonging. And when we choose a side, we're trying to help someone feel belonged to or belonging. And then the other person that we're not taking the side of feels disbelonging or unbelonging. And so their distress grows. And so this is something important to remember about attachment is there's enough to go around, or there could be enough to go around. And when we believe there's enough to go around, we often can find another way. So what are we looking at? We are looking at the window of transformation, which is just my little adaptation of Dan Siegel and Pat Ogden's window of tolerance. The window of transformation is a diagram I use a lot when I'm mediating or doing conflict training, conflict resolution training, or just training to be in conflict, I don't know. That to me kind of represents the level of nervous system stress and interpersonal stress that needs to happen or be present so that we can do conflict resolution successfully. So what is conflict resolution? Well, often conflict is about asking other people to change. Yes. My own mediation, one of my own mediation teachers, Betty Prees, likes to say that conflict is an invitation for the system to transform, which I love as an advocate of transformative justice, which is a non-punitive focused look at doing justice in instances of harm. So if conflict is an invitation for the system to transform, if there's a fight or a conflict going on, then that's an opportunity for us to look at, okay, like what's happening here in the relationship or around us that didn't work. So if we take the example of my fiance not getting me an indoor bedroom, well, the first part of me wants to say, well, what we're looking at is my fiance is not looking at, it's not listening to me properly. That's one. But then maybe also there's something that we could look at, like maybe I'm not communicating my needs clearly to my fiance, or maybe there needs to be more bedrooms in this house, or something like that. There is an invitation to look at the system and what's not working within it, but to be able to absorb that feedback about what needs to be changed or what's asking to be changed. In a relationship, there generally needs to be a sense of safe enoughness. Like, you're giving me this feedback, but I'm not going to lose my belonging. Or I have an opportunity to come back into belonging with this person who's giving me conflict-driven feedback. And so here in this window of transformation, you'll see some text. I'm going to read it out loud because it's a big block of text. My boundaries are respected and my questions are welcome. I seek self-accountability, growth, and challenges joyfully. I'm encouraged to be curious and seek new ways of interbeing. I have access to basic needs, personal healing, and support. And I feel safe enough to hear and integrate feedback. So we're probably going to always, some of us, feel stress when we're in a conflict. And this window of transformation, I'm going to guess, is that little spot at the edge of the window of tolerance, because the window of tolerance is sometimes a very comfortable place. And unfortunately, conflict is probably never going to be comfortable. But it can be a place that is safe enough to engage in transformation. So what we want to do with our own bodies is when we start to shift from belonging to belonging, like I'm not belonging, instead I'm longing to belong, I be longing, right? When we go from, when our belonging breaks in half and it's I be longing, then we want to find a way to check in with our bodies and come into our window of transformation. How do we do that? Well, we might do our grounding activities, right? We might slow down and take a break. We might ask for the person we're in conflict with to wait till like next week, right? We'll meet again. We promise we'll meet again and talk about this later. We might seek help and get friends or family members or loved ones to talk to us and be with us and hug us and hold us. And we might intentionally ask them, please don't take a side. Just help me to feel safe while I'm considering this conflict. And of course, this is only suitable for conflicts where there isn't something violent happening. Maybe you need to get away from your conflict and it's not about safety. It's not about repair, it's about safety. So, we're gonna choose again with our discerning brains, like what we want to do here with conflict. That I know there's a lot in that window of transformation that I didn't talk about just now, and we're not gonna have time, but you will get to look at it later. And I believe that I'm coming back to the Embodied Lab to do a lengthier discussion. Right now, I just really want us to hold on to this notion of a window of transformation, a space where it's intense, yes, but we're safe enough to engage in that process of change and giving feedback and receiving feedback in an integrated way. And for some of us, the situation just will not be safe enough. So I really can't emphasize enough how in an unjust social system, it's going to be really challenging for people who are experiencing injustice to find their window of transformation. Like if you're a racialized person, especially a Black or Indigenous person on Turtle Island, right, on colonially known North America, it's going to be asking a lot of a racialized person to find their window of transformation if they're experiencing racism, because the world is racist and full of racist danger. And often what we do in a settler colonial society is we put the onus of finding the window of transformation on the marginalized people. And then we also ask the marginalized people to help the dominant find their window of transformation. Anybody notice that before? Where it's like, oh, well, if you're going to talk to me about racism, be nice and make me feel safe while you talk about the racism you experience. And that's really a lot. That's putting a huge amount of stress on the nervous systems of those who are already in danger, often on a daily basis. And so whose responsibility is it to find the window of transformation? Well, I mean, I think to everyone, every adult, at least to some extent, but it is more on the folks who are already having access to some amount of safety systemically, right? If you are a white person, a wealthy person, a cisgender person, maybe all those things combined, and you have not the fear of being racially profiled by the police, if you have access to socioeconomic stability, then it's kind of more on you in some cases to find your window of transformation when having a conflict with someone about marginalization or systemic oppression, and they're coming from a more marginalized experience. So that has to be said, okay? And unfortunately, it is often people of color and other marginalized people who are more skilled at finding the window of transformation because we've had to navigate dangerous situations. But sometimes also, we're really good at helping other people find their window without being in ours because it's not really safe for us to actually be in an authentic, transforming place. So that's something that needs to be said. How do we help someone be in their window of transformation? What's the best way to support someone to be in their window? Anybody know? Just type into the chat. Compassion, hold space, listening. Yeah, so the techniques, listening and holding compassion, yes, but I was going for what one of you said, or maybe a couple of you, which is being in yours. Yes, creating the space and the safety to be in yours, in your window of transformation. Some of you who are experienced with trauma healing will have heard that being in your own window of tolerance will help other people be in theirs because of this thing called co-regulation, which is that when you're feeling safe and embodying safety, not just safety for you, but safety for the other person too, then they will start to feel safer. That's, I think, true, at least in my experience. When it comes to conflict resolution, the other reason that being in your window of transformation will help someone else be in theirs is because you are open to the possibility of changing. And when people who you're in conflict with see that, that often makes them more open to the possibility of changing as well. So if conflict is an invitation to change, and in conflict we are often asking or demanding that others change, it's easy to lose sight of the possibility that we might need to change as well. Especially when we're feeling like we've been hard done by, right? When someone has done something awful to us, why should we change? But when we are seeking bi-directional, authentic attachment, the other person needs to know generally that we are at least considering that we might need to change. Maybe in smaller ways than they do, but we do maybe need to consider that. And in that flowing space where I could change, you could change, we're sharing authentically, then that's where some of the attachment repair starts to happen. All right. Attachment is the title of this whole summit. So I assume lots of you have heard of attachment, which is the like the embodied sense of being connected to or disconnected from other people, essentially. You'll probably be hearing the word attunement used in a lot of different ways over the course of today as well. But I think I'm number one today, like the first presenter. So maybe I'm the first to say attunement on this day. And attunement is the quality of that connection. It's the experience that we're having when we're feeling attached or not attached. Attunement is when our needs are heard and responded to in a way that feels right, basically. I think it's Dan Siegel who, no, it's Dan Siegel who describes attunement as the resonance of our inner worlds. And attunement is key to the process of attachment repair in the wake of a conflict. Because if conflict is an invitation to change, often that invitation is about trying to get the other person to change what they are doing so they are meeting my needs more accurately, right? Or they're just meeting my needs at all instead of not meeting my needs, or actively, pushing me away from what I need. And the same for the other person, usually. And sometimes we have conflicting needs in a conflict. When we're in that space of embodied pain of having conflict, sometimes we will want multiple things at once that seem contradictory, like really wanting to be close to somebody, but also really wanting distance at the same time. The body will want to flee from the proximity and also want to hug at the same time somehow. We might really want to be able to admit that we feel ashamed and guilty for our behavior, but also we might not want to admit that we were wrong. We want to still be told that we were right, even as we're feeling ashamed and guilty about our behavior. Does anybody ever have that experience of wanting contradictory things at the same time? And yeah, lots. Yeah. And so that's a really hard thing to attune to, like as the person on the other end. It's like, well, I'm trying to validate you, but then you're just saying that you're wrong. Or, okay, you're saying you're okay, yeah, you're wrong. Then now you want to be told you're right. Or, you want to get away from me, I'll give you space. Wait, you still want me to be around? What? So we send mixed signals often in conflict, because we are in our most distressed attachment selves when we are in conflict. And when we're in conflict, usually, or also we have competing needs with the other person. So there's conflict inside ourselves, conflict with the other person, and it's all just very mixed up, very challenging. So how do we attune to that? How do we create resonance of the inner worlds? Well, one of the first and easiest things to do is to name those competing dynamics. To say, I'm really mad at you, and I still really love you, and I want to be close to you, and I need a break. I don't know what I want. I'm feeling confused. And to give the other person permission, or people permission, to want more than one thing at the same time. Like, if my partner, it's usually me who's having the shutdown, let's just be real. But if my partner is having a shutdown, I might say to them, you're allowed to be mad at me and to want to get away from me and be close to me at the same time. It's okay to want to ask me questions and not hear from me at the same time. It's okay to want to tell me your experience, but not trust me with your experience at the same time. And when we give permission to the other person to have that conflict inside of themselves, that itself is an attunement, because it is creating like a deeper level of understanding. Often in conflict, we're pushing the other person to be consistent, or we're trying to catch them, right? Like, aha, you said this on this day, and now you're saying this on that day, and you're wrong, right? Anyone ever had that happen to them? It's happened to me. And it's kind of crazy making. Like, it's not what I recommend for attachment repair, trying to catch the other person and being inconsistent. We can say to them, you're allowed to be inconsistent. Not inconsistent in, do you treat me well and then treat me badly? Not in the behaviors of treating someone well or badly. We should encourage consistency in treating other people well. But in wanting or saying things, expressing desire, we should probably, my suggestion is, create room to be inconsistent so that we too can be inconsistent. And this allows for a deeper level of attunement. And when we have that permission to have more than one need at the same time, it becomes easier to name the discordance in needs between us. Like, I need to sleep indoors and you need to not kick your grandma out of her bedroom so that we can sleep indoors, right? You have a fear of confronting your family, and I have an allergy to these insects, and I have a fear of being abandoned by you. And once we talk about that, when we name there's conflicts inside of us as well as conflicts between us, I don't want to make you confront your grandma and kick her out of her bedroom, but I also need to not be eaten alive and become a slumpy space princess. Then we can look at the conflict from the same perspective, or like a place of being on the same team. How can we meet my need to not get eaten to death by mosquitoes while also respecting the elders in your family? So we name the conflicts inside of each ourselves, we name the conflict between each other, and then we name the need to find a solution collaboratively. A less specific to me example might be, when we fight, you need space. When we fight, I need immediate resolution. Otherwise, I fly into an anxious spiral. How can we give you the space you need while letting me know that you still love me? Yeah. Inside of you, it seems like you want to get away from me, but I bet that you're not trying to abandon me. I don't think you're trying to leave me here and let me feel alone. And I am not trying to force you to stay here and give me resolution for all of my issues all by yourself. We're both just looking to feel safe and connected. How can we do that together? Attunement. It's so easy to say in like theory, much harder to do in real life. So I just want to give that caveat. Yes, I'm going to skip some slides and go to this one, which is what I call the 2 keys of loving justice. You don't need to worry about what loving justice is right now. It's my own somatic exploration of what transformative justice can look like. But 2 really simple strategies to hold on to when we are trying to do attachment repair after a conflict or a rupture are compassion and curiosity. When we bring compassion and curiosity together, we often get conflict de-escalation. And when we're really curious in a non-anxious way or relatively non-anxious way, we often are able to get into that attunement place with the person that we're in conflict with. To be able to do that, we have to have compassion for ourselves as well. It is pretty easy for some, not all, but for some, to go fully into compassion for the other and not for ourselves. And when we do that, we create agreements or resolutions that are not sustainable, usually, because it becomes all about the other person and not ourselves. And the reason we're doing that is usually to preserve the relationship, and we don't think that if we put in our own needs, then the relationship will break. Unfortunately, usually the relationship ruptures again anyway, because we build resentment in the space of not sharing our own needs. So we need to be able to be compassionate towards ourselves as well, and curious. And if you really are looking for like a breakdown, simple strategy that's conversational, I invite you to remember this 3-step model, which is compassionate statement, curious question, and firm boundary. Compassionate statement, curious question, firm boundary. Not always in that order. So when we are having a conflict conversation with someone, if we can remember to do a compassionate statement like, yeah, you are really angry right now. It makes sense that you're angry right now. I can see how upset you are. Compassionate, curious. What could I do, or what could I be doing that would make you less angry? Or what was it that made you upset about my behavior? And firm boundary. If what I'm doing is that's upsetting you is talking about my experience of racism, then I'm still going to talk about my experience of racism when I need to. It's a firm boundary, right? Compassionate statement, curious question, firm boundary. The compassionate statements and curious questions are to get us deeper into the other person's inner world. And the firm boundary is to protect our own needs and to keep us safe. So it's my hope that by using these 3 tools, you're able to find your window of transformation, and by embodying that window, help others to find their own windows as well. So I'm going to repeat that just in case anybody needs to hear it again. Compassionate statement, Curious question. Firm boundary. All right. So that is as much as I can cover in 1 hour. I'm happy to tell you that that whole thing with my fiance and me worked out pretty well in the end. And I don't think we're ever going to have that particular conflict again, which is good. It means that my need was understood eventually. But we had this pretty funny moment where, like right after that morning, I went in for breakfast with my fiance's family, and my fiance's uncle said, "My goodness, you're covered in lumps. Are you allergic to mosquitoes?" And my partner said, "She's just pretending." And we all laughed because it was a joke. And I tell that story all the time now when I want to have a laugh at them and a laugh at myself. So that is that. I invite you to laugh with me if you're going to laugh at that. I invite you to take a long breath in and a longer breath out. And I'm going to give you a piece of homework that you could try if you want to, which is so that conflict that you were thinking about, the one that was a 6 out of 10, remember that? To write on a piece of paper or in a document somewhere what you would have needed that other person you were in conflict with to say to you and ask you to help you find your window of transformation. What should that other person you were in conflict with have said to you, or even done differently in terms of giving you space or not, following up or not? What could they have done differently? This is an exercise I often do as a conflict coach when I'm working individually with people in conflict. What is it that you would need the other person to do? Partly because that gives us a map of like who we are and what we need, but also there can be something pretty healing in giving that to ourselves, even if the other person is never going to. Okay, so let's take a moment for questions. So Zoe, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, hi. Thank you for this. It's very helpful. I am curious when we have people that we have to communicate with that are not so safe, but maybe we share children or our family members that we can't necessarily avoid. How do we remain in our, like, it doesn't even seem possible to me to totally, be in my window of attunement during some of those times. But I'm curious how, when someone else is violent, how do we protect ourselves in those communications?
That's such a great question and so important. Thank you for asking it. So yeah, today we were talking about attachment repair largely, right? And when someone is violent, we're often not going to want to do attachment repair. Like we don't want to be in like an authentic, deep relationship with violent people often. Now, sometimes we do, of course, and that's like a complex experience. And then sometimes there are situations where we have to be in some kind of ongoing relationship with that other person who is or was violent because of like shared priorities or needs, children, etc. And so, I would say we're aiming less for attunement to them in that case, if they're still being actively violent, because when we open ourselves to being attuned, we create vulnerability, and we don't necessarily want to create more vulnerability in ourselves to someone who might still be violent. We might still want to aim for a window of transformation in that we need to have some like kind of logistical dialogue, right? About like, what are we going to do here and at this time and that kind of thing. And so that's like maybe like a less deep window of transformation you want to be in. And the way we can get there, I think, is to start with ourselves, like be attuned to ourselves. What is my body really saying about this person and what I need? And getting really clear about what our objectives and priorities are. And then seeing if we can make the situation of being in active conversation or dialogue with that other person safer. So would it be safer, for example, to have like a mediator present? Is what couples who need to, or former couples who need to share children often do, is they have mediators present for conversations about joint custody. Sometimes those are formal mediators who are paid. Sometimes that's safe family members. And when we invite more people into the situation, sometimes that makes it safer. Again, we got to talk to those people that we're inviting in so that we're sure that they are actually making it safer and not escalating. But it's seeing if we can add things to the situation of being in contact with that person that can help our nervous systems to feel safer and to actually help us be safer in a practical sense. I hope that is somewhat helpful. Yeah, okay. So Marlene, I see you have your hand up as well.
Hi, thank you
Hello.
so much for sharing your knowledge with us. I would like to ask if you have any tips specifically when having a conversation to consider getting back together. Because as the person who was broken up with, I don't know how to ask for, my needs to get met and all that since I was broken up with at first. So I don't know if you have any tips for that. Thank you.
Any tips for having conversations about getting back together after a breakup? That's a good one. Well, if we're thinking about the model that I just shared, I think it might be helpful to, before you have that conversation, maybe do some of the homework pieces. And if it's going to be overwhelming, maybe to do that with a counselor or therapist or practitioner of some kind about what would you have needed in the past? Or like what did it seem like the other person needed from you is another variant of that homework. Like if you could go back in time and do it differently, what would you do? So that you can get clear about like, what is it really possible for you to change? And what is it not possible for you to change? Especially as the one who, I'm very sorry to hear, experienced being broken up with. That is usually, the other person saying, I have needs that are not getting met in this relationship. And that may be, because of something you were doing or not doing, or it might actually just be them and their stuff, right? Like their own needs that has nothing to do with you and your capacity, right? So important to get clear on what do you need in a relationship for it to feel sustainable? What is it they needed that they were trying to get from you? And then maybe bring those pieces together with that other person and to really find out like what was it that they needed that they weren't getting? And is that something you can provide or are willing to provide? Or is that something you're not able to provide? And then, maybe you part ways, or maybe they have needs that they need to look for outside of you and it has nothing to do with you. And then you part ways. Or maybe there are other points of connection that you both can shift. And I guess a really big piece that I would say is when it comes to a conversation like that, you want to be checking maybe if both of you are in that window of transformation. Like, are both of you feeling willing and wanting to make some shifts in order to bring the relationship back together? Okay, thank you for that question. Nicole, I think you have a hand up as well.
Hi, thank you so much for everything. This was amazing. My question is, how can we independently resolve conflict? So when the other person has walked away or they're not willing to do it, but we're still feeling the rupture within ourselves, how can we is it possible? And what can we do to kind of resolve it, not in relationship when it was about a relationship?
Yeah, this is key. So this is where that homework piece comes in. Sometimes when we're really doing it in like a depthful somatic way, and I would do this with a practitioner, not by yourself. Sometimes I coach folks through a process of embodying that other person, but in an ideal form. Like imagine that other person, but like 1,000 years in the future, super, healed and enlightened, and then coming back in time to tell you what you need to hear, an apology or an expression of understanding, and then maybe switching and going back into your own embodied self and telling that person what you need to tell them, an apology, an angry statement, impact statements of harmful behavior, so that you're getting to embody and experience that embodied energy of having a healing conversation, but without that real live person in the room because they're not able to do that with you for whatever reason. Yeah. Great question. Thank you. I love that. That reminds me of the empty chair process. I see. Yeah, so it's a variant of the empty chair process from Gestalt therapy for sure. Yeah, beautiful. I think we have time for one more question. So Gabby, I see your hand is up.
Yes, thank you. I'm so happy. I feel like I won the lottery. I wanted to ask if you were able to repeat. I wrote it down where, I'm sorry, we're looking to feel safe. And did you say we're looking to feel safe and adjusted? How do we get there? Attunement?
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
I just wanted to confirm that.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. Maybe we could even have time for another question. Julie, your hand is up.
Thank you. You can hear me? Yes, you can. Okay. So my question was kind of moving into the going back to hypoarousal. It seems to be something that I resonated with that. Like my own personal pattern would be to go into a hypoarousal. So is that like a freeze, like a total shutdown state? Is that what that is referring to?
Yes, great question. So hypoarousal often does refer to like sort of the lower tone freeze where someone is like looking checked out maybe, or
Right.
like they don't care. Another version of hypoarousal might be like a submission, like whatever you want, whatever you say, you're always right.
Okay.
That kind of checking out or distancing or numbing kind of quality. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for the questions, everyone, and thank you for being here today. Thanks so much to the Embodied Lab for having me. Allison, I don't know if you're still here, but thank you so much for helping out. Really appreciate it. Sorry to those whose questions we didn't get to today. Hopefully we'll find some answers in the workbook, or we'll get to work again together sometime in the future.